seated because I think that I absolutely would not have started in this place, but I feel compelled in this moment because framework is critically important.
No doubt.
You need to be able to locate the place that I'm speaking from as I offer my comments. And I take exception to the notion that the challenges that we're having with educating all of our students is simply an issue of residential segregation. There is nothing that is an elixir in and of itself that happens when black children and white children sit next to each other if some other things are not happening at the same time. Secondly, it is highly troubling for me to be at a conference where we're talking about racism, race, and we're using words like ghetto and calling kids minority. If we're going to talk about race, let's talk about race. We talk about kids being disadvantaged, and we never critique all of the other things that put kids at an advantage. So why is it that being middle class would be advantageous? What about the system and the way that we operate in public schooling places those kids at an advantage? We talk about poverty as though it's a disease that impacts learning. And what I challenge us to do is to actually step back and consider the actual process of schooling. I'm a practitioner, so I spend my days with teachers, with principals, with parents, with young people. I worked in Baltimore City and I worked in Baltimore County, and I can tell you that there are so many factors that impact what happens with young people that has everything to do with what goes on in schools. Decisions that folks make. Baltimore County is a racially mixed school system. It is a socioeconomically mixed school system. But let me ask this question, a little bit of audience participation. What are the ways that we can segregate students who attend an integrated school, a racially integrated school? What are some of the ways?
Classes and beliefs.
Special education.
GT.
AP.
That's right.
On and on and on and on. So we can racially integrate our schools. And I'm not arguing suspensions, BLS programs, emotional disturbance programs. Right? So I'm not arguing that there isn't a conversation about residential segregation that ought to be had and the way it impacts schools because it's going to impact funding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we don't deal with racism and systemic white supremacy that is a part of our modus operandi day in, day out, it won't matter that we integrate our schools.
Go ahead.
Francis Cress says, used to say before she passed, if you don't understand racism and the system of white supremacy, everything else you think you know will only confuse you. And the way that plays out in schooling is very, very clear. If you think about the origins of our schools historically, they were founded on classism, sexism, racism, and ableism. What's the evidence that all of those isms are still playing out? Look at the data.
Boom.
And I did not bring slides to show you nationally these very consistent trends that show that certain students are going to be winners and certain students are going to be losers just because of the way that they show up is pronounced across school districts across this country. In Baltimore County, we don't have an achievement gap in graduation rate between black students and white students. And there was no deseg ordinance that happened that you guys missed. Meaning we have some hyper-segregated schools, and we have some integrated schools, we have some highly affluent schools, and we have some struggling schools. But what we're actually doing is the hard work of dealing with systemic inequity.
That's right.
We're having those hard conversations where the superintendent, the school board, teachers, principals, we're stepping back and critiquing our policies, practices, and procedures because they were not created to serve the students who attend our schools today. That's just the reality. There are no villains and there are no heroes. There are only people who need to do work on behalf of all children. And so while certainly there are some technical things that we absolutely should be thinking about, there is some rumbling that needs to happen within school systems today. Rumbling and reckoning. The rumbling starts with an admission that schools were literally not created to serve all students. That's where the book, The Treaty of Hopkins, is saying that's where it came from. My frustration out of going into schools that were being challenged with a myriad of factors, but they still wanted to operate in a way that they could when Baltimore County was racially homogeneous, socioeconomically homogeneous, same policies, practices, and procedures. Those things happen because they're comfortable for adults.
Hey.
And then because children are voiceless, it's real easy to talk about the problems with kids. It's real easy to talk about the problems with families, communities, etc., etc. They're never the ones that are at the podium explaining the ways in which they are underserved. And so it becomes, again, incumbent upon us to sort of step back and do the soul-searching, heart-wrenching part of this work that can complement all of our intellectual understanding of the problem. But the real question is if we'll have the courage to do it. I mean, it is critically important that there's a policy environment to deal with issues of school inequity, right? We could not do the work that we do in Baltimore County if we did not have a policy environment that suggested that meeting the needs of all students is important, and so we have to have a systemic focus in that way. But that's actually not the end of the work. That's actually only the beginning. And the reality is you can only really fully actualize those policies when people have some capacity to see the way the system is functioning unequally for all students. And so I will close, because I'm not exactly sure where I am on time, okay, by saying this, that there is a rumbling, to use a Brené Brown term, who I'm absolutely in love with right now. She talks about rumbling and reckoning. There's a rumbling that needs to happen within public education that has everything to do with reconciling the fact that we need to make substantive transformation that is not rooted in looking at children and communities as deficits. Black, brown, and Native kids are not broken.
That's right.
Hello? We need to transform our policies and ultimately see the value and the worth of all young people. And when we do those things, line our actions up accordingly.
Hey,
Thank you.
say that. Woo!